Yes, welcome to the Biz Communication Show. I'm your host, Bill Lampton. You and I know that strong, vital communication skills are central to your business success. They impact your management, your leadership, your teamwork, your morale, your customer service, and yes, your profits as well. And so that's why every week on the Biz Communication Show, I bring in a communication expert to share with us their tips and their strategies. Today, I have someone who describes himself this way. He said he's a battle-scarred businessman, not somebody who got a weekend coaching certificate. I love that. And it's really the case because Robert Mallon is a person who not only survived, but excelled in one of the toughest industries of all, the restaurant industry. He's also launched previously a software company, and now he is in his 15th year as a business consultant, sharing what he learned about how to succeed in business, primarily through strong communication skills. I met Robert a couple of years ago. I had the opportunity to attend one of his seminars hosted by the Greater Hall Chamber of Commerce in Gainesville, Georgia, where I live and operate. Robert lists the greater Atlanta area, and also much of his work is outside of this area, and we'll let him tell you a little bit about that. Again, it's a great privilege to welcome Robert Mallon. And by the way, his company is the Lion's Pride, and he will tell us about that as well. Welcome, Robert, to the Biz Communication Show.
Bill, so happy to be on with you. And, as the crow flies, I believe we live about a mile away from each other. I believe, but it's around the lake. But have thoroughly enjoyed knowing you so far. And thank you so much for inviting me on.
Well, delighted to do that. Now, I mentioned your vast business experience. I mentioned that you were in tough industries, and yet, for example, when you were a leader in Chili's restaurants, your restaurants became a model that others could look at to learn how to operate and how to make profits and how to manage customers and employees. As we think about the communication skills required for success in business, what would you list as 2 or 3 of the major communication skills that business leaders need to excel?
Well, I'll tell you one right off the bat that jumps to mind that most people don't think about, but there was an article in Harvard Business Review several years ago, and it said that 70% of a leader's effectiveness is based on their ability to listen well, So, usually when people think about communication, they think about speaking or the different types of speaking or feedback. But I would say number one would be learning how to listen very, very well. Bill, have you ever heard of what's called the speaker-listener technique?
I'm not sure that I have, but I'll have to say right off that what you're saying resonates so strongly with me. And I know that you're familiar with what Stephen Covey said about this, that most people aren't listening to understand. Most people are just waiting their turn to speak. But what is this that you're referring to?
Well, the speaker-listener technique, my business partner and I used it Friday. We're doing this on a Monday, but we're at the end of the year. We're looking at different ways that we can move forward in 2018. So we have some different opinions, but basically the speaker listener is, for example, if you and I were doing it, Bill, you would speak first. You would go very short, like maybe 30 seconds or so, because sometimes when emotions get in, we start thinking a little bit off track. And then what I do is my whole purpose is to paraphrase back to you what I've just heard. Okay. So it goes back to what you said, Stephen Covey. What is it? Seek first to understand, then to be understood. So when Bill and I did this, it was really good. And he and I used it some, but not a lot. We really started getting under the meanings that we had. And I would say things like this: Bill, what I really hear you saying is, and I would give it back to him. He was like, that's exactly what I'm saying there. So I wasn't using his exact words, but I was really getting the intent. Then we would switch, and it would be my turn to speak, and then he would paraphrase back what he heard from me. And I think what you do that, I'm going to put on the screen here so you can see it. That's a little tile that somewhat explains that. And Bill, to be quite frank with you, I think you know this, my first wife passed away from cancer.
Yes.
But we were married about 26 years, but about 10 years into it, she came home one day and she says, I think we need to go see a marriage counselor. I'm like, well, I hope you enjoy your time, But I ended up going, and he taught us this. So that was back in the 1980s, I guess. And we still, my wife and I still use it today. But just a great thing, the speaker-listener technique, but really honing in on how do you listen more effectively and really understanding. There's one other, Bill, if you wouldn't mind me saying this, but do you know what dichotomous thinking is? Have you ever heard of that, dichotomous thinking?
Well, I suppose by the mention of the term, it has to do with two sides of something.
Exactly. It's how we usually go into it as a leader or a manager or whatever, but when you're communicating with people, we tend to go in thinking, I'm right and you're wrong. And it's a 100% black, white way of thinking. But in the real world, there's a lot of shades of gray. And so, for example, Bill, if I held my hand out like that and said to you, describe my hand, and you started describing from that side, I would go, Bill, no, my thumb is not on the right, it's on the left. No, I've got knuckles. There's no lines on my. So you're seeing it completely different than me. But the key is,
that's
you're
a fascinating
not
example. Real fascinating.
Exactly. You're not wrong, and I'm not wrong either.
Mm-hmm.
We just see it from different points of view. So when you really get good at listening to people, you can understand their point of view and your point of view too, and that's where the real truth is. So I would say
let me underscore what you're saying there by mentioning that in my home state of Mississippi, after I became a consultant, I was doing a seminar for attorneys. And as I got to the topic of listening, one of the attorneys raised his hand and he said, Bill, I have been involved in handling more than 500 divorce cases. Mm. And in every one of those cases, either one or both parties said about the other one, he or she does not listen to me. And when I go back to what you're saying about how we test whether we really heard somebody, yes, Stephen Covey emphasizes that a lot, and others do. It really goes back much farther than that to psychoanalyst Carl Rogers. Carl Rogers was one of the first who talked about the two-way exchange, and as you're putting, the listening test. Have you really gotten not only their words, but their intent? So I agree with you fully that number one, I would really rank it first among the communication skills for success in business is listening. After all, when a customer comes in with a complaint, what's the main way to resolve that complaint, Robert? Is listening to them.
100%. I would have to, you said one or two, so I'll give you another. I would say learning to give like great feedback to your employees and to have, there's a thing called assertive communication. So the vast majority of people are either passive or passive aggressive. So they won't speak up because they're afraid to speak up, or even when they don't speak up, they will kind of get you in the back. But then there's aggressive. They say about 80% of people are passive aggressive by nature. 15% are aggressive by nature, and 5% are what's called assertive by nature. And so learning to be assertive, which means the best definition I ever heard was standing up for my rights while respecting the rights of others, acting with neutrality. So doing things in a neutral tone. But I find that so many people that we work with, business leaders, they just will not have the crucial conversations that they need to have with their staff because they're afraid, two things, they're afraid either of confrontation or they're afraid that they will not be liked. And I think both of those are just innate things that 99%, I want to be liked, you want to be liked, but as a leader, your job is not to be liked, your job is to get things done. And so you've got to have those good, tough conversations, but in the right way that people feel respected. So I would say those two.
Very fine. Now, your company, the Lion's Pride,
Yeah.
tell us what that's about, where and how you operate.
The Lion's Pride, it's very, very niche. I've been coaching, as you said, 15 years now, but my best friend, a guy named Bill Watkins, Bill and I have been best friends for a little over 2 decades now. He owned a bunch of manufacturing companies in Georgia. And back around 2011, he sold the companies. He moved up to Jackson Hole, Wyoming. But he's a young guy. We're not old guys. And he was getting a little bit bored. He was skiing a lot, riding his bike a lot and all. And he called me back 4 years ago and he said, I'm really thinking about opening a coaching business. He's really good at that anyway. And he says, I want you to consider doing it with me. And I was already doing that. Well, Bill was a graduate from West Point. He was number 2 in his class, mechanical engineer by trade, very systems-oriented guy, and I'm not. So his strengths are my weaknesses, and my strengths are his weaknesses. So when he asked me that, and I've known him a long time and have a lot of respect, I said, I'm in. Let's figure this thing out. So we deal specifically, Bill, with men who either own businesses or who are top leaders within businesses. But the best way to explain it, Bill, is that most men, and I would say some women do this too, most men, when they're at work, because they work so hard, they feel guilty that they're not at home, and when they're at home, they're worried that things are going wrong at work. And so they have a very hard time being present at either place. So we work on the whole person, specifically the business, but then we go after the men's lives too, so that they can really have some pretty extraordinary lives. It's very unique. I don't think there's another company that does what we do, basically.
It would seem to me that this business of being able to get away from your work has been made even more difficult because of technology. I know there are leaders who unfortunately think that because we have email and we have smartphones, that as a leader, you have a right to text somebody at midnight and they should be responding within a few minutes. That's part of the difficulty in maybe our advancement in technology. That's something we have to adjust to more constructively, isn't it?
We actually have if I could tell you a super quick little story, but one of our clients back in, I think it was April or May, he set a 90-day goal because this is a guy who's a real estate broker. He lives in a beautiful part of the country, very, very successful guy. His problem was he would get home at about 5:30 or 6 o'clock at night. He has 2 little girls, one 9 and one 7, and all night long he was on screens. He was just on the screen. And so the goal that we set, now this is one of the craziest goals I've ever heard before. Every night at 6 o'clock, he and his 2 little girls walk into his bedroom. They take his phone, they put the phone under the covers of the bed, and they put it on airplane mode, and they know how to do it, okay? So from 6 o'clock every day, 7 days a week, they have that ritual, and he has a timer that goes off. They all march in there together. And on his phone, he says, his name is Dan, but he says, this is Dan, thanks for calling. If you're calling after 6 o'clock, I will be back with you tomorrow. And it's family time for me, basically, is what he said. I think it's one of the greatest things in the world, but you have to manage that screen time. I agree with you, Bill.
And how many times have you gone to a restaurant, you see a family there, maybe a father and a mother and 2 children, each one of them is texting, and doggone good and well, they're not texting each other.
They're not present at all. They're not present at all. So that's a big deal, big deal.
You have been a successful entrepreneur several times. The workforce trend is going to bring more and more entrepreneurs into into the arena because, well, you and I read the papers, we hear the news. What day do you not pick up the paper and read about downsizings? And
Mhm.
even before someone's downsized, they might start thinking, hey, I don't have the long-term security just because I'm with a company. I'm going to start my own company. What's your best advice to someone who wants to step into that exciting, challenging, and potentially rewarding world of entrepreneurship?
Let me give you two pieces of advice if I could. Number one would be there's a good saying: if you don't have an assistant, you are one. Okay, that's a big deal. Get a great assistant. Get an incredible assistant, the best assistant that you can get. Uh, and really, with that assistant, spend time training them on the expectations that you have for them and teaching them how to do the job that you want them to do. So I would say that would be, don't do it alone. Make sure that you have other people with you, but have a great assistant. And number two, and this might be the most important thing, would be hire only what I call an A player. So an A player is the top 10% of available talent for any given position out there. A B player, the way we talk about it, would be the next 25%. And then a C player would be anything from that 65% down. Here's the problem. C players are always looking for jobs, so they're very available. You know, B players, A players, the ones that I'm talking about, they already have a job, and their companies do not want them leaving whatsoever. But if you only hire A players, your life gets very, very easy. And there's ways to do that, but that would be the two pieces of advice I would definitely give anybody.
The one tip that I would add, which I'm sure as a coach you agree with,
Mhm.
and that is, as I look back on, I'm in my 20th year as an entrepreneur. What has been more valuable to me than anything else is making sure that you find the right coaches and
Mhm.
the right mentors. You're a
Yeah.
coach, you're a mentor. And the first 6 months that I had my own business, I made the mistake of thinking that I could fly solo, but
Mhm.
you don't get very far and you don't go very fast flying solo. And the minute I admitted that there were people who knew the marketing skills and the technology skills that I could never discover on my own, the time and the dollars that I invested in them, that's the best time and dollars that I've spent in 20 years. Uh,
100%.
Mark Twain had one of my favorite sayings. He said, one man said to him, I'm a self made man. And Mark Twain said, well, that relieves the Lord of a great responsibility. Robert, time has just flown by. And so I have time for just one final
Okay.
comment and question. You have said this. You've said the secret of success, and I heard you say this in your seminar that I attended at the Greater Hall Chamber. You said the secret of success is determined by your daily agenda.
Mhm.
Tell us in 60 seconds what you mean by that.
Daily agenda. What most people do is they just do a day out of their heads, and they're trying to figure it out. I would say one of the top secrets that you could give to people would be every single day, construct a great list of things to do. Keep it at about 60% of your day because other things are going to happen. You're going to have phone calls, all this type of stuff. But prioritize that list and always begin on A1, like the most important thing first thing in the morning. But have a list every day, complete that list, live in what I call day tight compartments, which means don't worry about yesterday, don't worry about tomorrow, just take care of the work itself. So if you have multiple successful days, you're going to have an extremely successful life.
Reminds me very much of a book that I read a good number of years ago, Alan Lakeen's book, How to Get Control of Your Time and
Time
Your
and life.
Life. And I like so much what Benjamin Franklin said. Benjamin Franklin said, dost thou value life? then value time, because that's the stuff that life is made up of.
Bill, that book changed my life in the mid-1980s. I read that book on an airplane coming from Dallas to Atlanta, changed my life.
The same thing happened with me, because I went to a seminar where somebody used that book. I read it, and in fact, the first coaching session, the first seminar I ever directed was on the topic of time management, because it had become so valuable for me. Robert, I know that all of those who have viewed our discussion and those who've heard it on podcast want to have further contact with you. So please share with us your contact information.
Absolutely. Website would be thelionspride.com. Very simple. You can reach me at robert@lionspride.com, or my telephone number is 770-906-7397, 770-906-7397. Love to help anybody that wanted to pass it along there.
Let me say to listeners and viewers that sometimes you wonder if an authority you're listening to, if that person is authentic. This guy is. I don't know everyone I interview, but I happen to know him.
Thank you.
I can tell you, this guy is authentic, well worth reaching out to. And now, Robert, that you've given your contact information, I'll give mine, the Biz Communication Guy. So logically, my website, Biz, that's B-I-Z, bizcommunicationguy.com. Invite you to go there, sign up for my newsletter, check my services, and see how I can assist you and your company. Been great having you with us today as a viewer and or a podcast listener. Next week, we will bring you another outstanding leader in the field of business communication. Meanwhile, thanks for being with us. Any parting words, concluding words there, Robert?
No, Bill, thank you so much. Just really enjoyed this time with you.
Well, thank you. And believe me, keep your calendar handy, Robert, because we'll be calling on you again a few months down the road. Thanks very much to everybody.